Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
Derby weekend wrapped up with Pep City hosting Ten Hag's improving Reds. In a one-sided fixture, City came out on top 6-3 winners thanks to hat-tricks by Haaland and Foden, while Antony and Martial scored the consolation for United. The open play XG backed this up. But just how was Pep able to tactically dominate Ten Hag? In this video we'll take a look. And if you're into fantasy football, join me on Spitch, which is my favorite fantasy football app, and this is how my team looks this week. I like it because before the match, you can look in depth at a player's previous stats, and Spitch also cares about so much more than just goals and assists, letting you score points for passes, tackles, and so much more, so midfield players like Kovacic can actually score points. On top of that, you can join at any time because prizes are given out weekly, and your scores reset weekly. If that sounds good, download it through the link in the description and join my community, FMS FC. One of the biggest strengths of Pep City is the ability to pull apart opposition. In this game, they set up initially with more of a traditional back four, with Cancelo and Walker remaining deeper than they normally would, instead of always inverting into the midfield. At the same time, both De Bruyne and Silva were highly aggressive in pushing high up the pitch, so that City's shape often looked like this. United defensively were also setting up in a 4-2-3-1, allowing Fernandes to remain on Gundogan, and De Bruyne and Silva pushing high up would force Eriksen and McTominay to remain deeper in these positions so that it was a man-to-man situation. But although this would mean that all the midfielders were covered, it also meant that the United midfielders could easily be drawn into different positions depending on where City chose to move, so at times they could take advantage of this and open up new spaces centrally. So here we see that United are setting up in a 4-2-3-1, with Gundogan remaining deepest, whilst De Bruyne and Bernardo have pushed higher up, and as you can see, the United midfielders are looking to go man-to-man. And usually in these scenarios we could see both or one fullback inverting into the midfield, but in the first half in particular, Pep opted not to do this, rather keeping them deeper and wider than would normally see, because this opened up new options for them. But United's defensive shape meant that Rashford would be 2 versus 1. He could cover this lateral passing lane between the two centre-backs well. It wasn't enough to stop City from progressing higher up the pitch. Instead, what we would often see is that when Rashford pressed one centre-back and the ball was played across, both Akanji and Ake are great on the ball for centre-backs, so they could then drive up the pitch and open up new angles to complete passes higher up the pitch. So here we see that Rashford is the sole man with the responsibility against two centre-backs and in this case Ederson. So of course he can't cover this and the ball goes out to Akanji. Rashford hasn't had enough time to get close to Akanji, so he can instead look to drive higher up the pitch. And he's not confronted because as we can see, the United midfielders are still going man-to-man with City's own midfielders. Akanji drives up the pitch well and completes a dangerous pass into Grealish, who can now be 1 versus 1 with Dalot. And it leads to a crossing opportunity for Gomez, but it's blocked. But as discussed, the City midfield could manipulate the United midfield, so what we would often see is that De Bruyne and Silva would be fairly wide apart, dragging McTominay and Eriksen with them. This would then create a gap in the midfield that the centre-back, when they drove up, would have the opportunity to pass into, because Haaland would then be willing to drop into midfield and link up the play, although Martinez would be aggressive in looking to close him down at times. So here we see Rashford as the sole forward cannot really apply much pressure, so Akanji can move higher up the pitch. When he does, we can see that United are still looking to go man-to-man with the City midfielders, creating a bit of a gap in this region. And Haaland is able to drop into that gap to then receive, also drawing Martinez out of position. So Ten Hag did at times look to stop the easy forward progression by City in deeper areas, and on a couple of occasions we did see Fernandes push higher up, which would be a common pressing structure with the attacking midfielder joining and using their cover shadow to still prevent the ball into the pivot. But with De Bruyne and McTominay being so high up, there will be a lot of space for Gundogan to then look to open himself up to receive the pass. So here we see that Fernandes has become more involved in the pressing, but both McTominay and Eriksen are quite deep, meaning that there is a massive gap in the midfield. So it's not too hard for Gundogan to move into and receive from Ake. And then he has space to play forwards. So instead of Fernandes moving onto a centre-back, what we did see was the wingers in Sancho and Antony in particular become more involved in the pressing, taking up these positions where they could press both the centre-back whilst looking to cover the full-back. But City were happy with this, because Ederson could just become much more involved in the build-up play, so that it was technically a back three. And Ederson did complete a ridiculous number of passes in this game. So now, with a dedicated back three, it would be much more difficult for a winger to cover both of these men. And what we saw was that both Antony and Sancho at times would be drawn onto the wide centre backs, so that Ederson could then find Cancelo or Walker higher up the pitch, and there's a 2 versus 1 wide, or a 3 versus 2 if McTominay was coming across to cover. Still a dangerous situation for United. So here, City have formed a back three with Ederson being the third man. And as you can see, both Sancho and Antony are being drawn onto the wider centre backs. So there's the potential for Ederson to play the chip ball out to Cancelo, and he's able to receive the ball in space and can look to drive up the pitch or slow the tempo down. But Antony and Sancho being positioned so high up gave City a lot of advantages higher up. Because of the man-to-man situations in the midfield, McTominay and Eriksen could be reluctant to cover in the wide regions at times. So what we would see is De Bruyne and Silva moving higher into the half spaces, whilst Grealish and Foden could hold the width. So, against the backline, it would be a 5 versus 4 situation at times, and this wouldn't be helped by the fullback being able to come into this region and form a wide triangle on the left-hand side in particular. What this would mean is that Grealish would often find himself in 1 versus 1 situations against Dalot to take him on directly. So although Cancelo is deeper in this situation, we can see that Antony is drawn towards him. So he can find Grealish to be 1 versus 1 against Dalot, although in this situation it comes to nothing. But this scenario would also open up the option for Grealish to find Silva when he made the run through the half space, where he could then look for a cross. This is actually a combination of everything we saw before, with Akanji driving forward, De Bruyne and Bernardo having split, opening up the space for Haaland to receive. Haaland plays the ball back, and as we can see, Antony's being drawn in central. Because Rashford can't cover everybody, Fernandes is drawn towards Ake, who is driving high with the ball, so now Gundogan can receive in behind the press. Bernardo ties up Dalot in the half space, and this allows the wide pass into Grealish, who can then play the ball into Bernardo in the half space, who then crosses, leading to a decent chance for Foden. At times, if he was granted a little bit more space, perhaps with Dalot covering Silva and McTominay on Cancelo, we also saw Grealish willing to drive infield and combine with Haaland. So here we see our usual wide triangle of Grealish, Bernardo and Cancelo. Bernardo infield draws Dalot, so the ball into Grealish is on. Space is created as McTominay looks to cover Bernardo, so Grealish can cut infield. He combines with Haaland in a dangerous area, leading to a free kick that comes off the post. But how do these points we talked about play into the first couple of goals? For Foden's first, we can see that the usual triangle of Bernardo, who's rotated with Grealish, Cancelo, and Grealish himself are on. Although in this case, Antony has dropped deeper. But with Antony dragged out of position, Cancelo can drive higher up, drawing McTominay towards him and opening up space for Bernardo on the outside. And this is a region that City were able to find many crosses from throughout the match, leading to the goal. And here we see how City's midfield manipulation was so effective. This time Cancelo is deeper once again, but it still has the same effect of drawing Antony higher up the pitch. But here it's Bernardo who has moved out wide, and this draws McTominay across towards him as United wanted to be man-to-man with midfielders. Gundogan is also being tracked man-to-man by Fernandes, and in this case Grealish has moved infield, so now he's an extra midfielder and is free to receive. So where before they could be man-to-man, now Eriksen finds himself 2 versus 1, so he can't close Grealish down too aggressively. This gives him the needed space to find De Bruyne, who finds an excellent ball to Haaland, who can finish. But when Walker was off, we did see a tweak in the second half, as Gomez was much more willing to invert. This would mean that where at times in the first half we saw Silva dropping in to be the second pivot, now Gomez could do that job. So when he received the ball, with Antony often either deep and wide or on Ake, Gomez would tend to draw McTominay out of position, and this would create more space for Silva or De Bruyne to operate in the half space. And this led to several dangerous situations, and Gomez, after playing the pass, was then often able to overlap as well. So here, Gomez is in the midfield, allowing Bernardo to move higher up into the half space as the midfielder is being drawn towards Gomez. Gomez is then able to split the line and find Bernardo, and as a result, Bernardo can play a dangerous pass into Haaland. And once again here we see that Gomez is beginning to invert, potentially drawing Antony towards him. This means that De Bruyne has more space higher up in the half space to receive from Gundogan. De Bruyne can then feed Grealish, and Gomez is already looking to overlap. And now again we have our left side triangle, and De Bruyne is able to find Gomez as Grealish's run takes the man with him, and Haaland does the rest. Overall, it was a scoreline that flattered United, as it was complete domination from start to finish, and Ten Hag will be disappointed. From a tactical score, City had several ways of pulling United apart, and Pep earns a 9, as they did occasionally look shaky defensively. United were undeniably poor, meaning that Ten Hag earns a 3 due to a lack of adaptation. But please, drop your ratings down below.
And if you enjoyed this video, you may also enjoy the FMS Patreon. On Patreon, you'll get early access to videos, exclusive videos, as well as the ability to vote on various polls and so much more. It's a great way to support the channel, and it is now cheaper than ever. All you have to do is head over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple, or press the card in the top right or the end card at the end of this video. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.